Good evening. Welcome to this international launch of 3 new collections from Bloodaxe Books. Tonight we have a first collection, a second collection, and a fourth collection. We'll be hearing from, first of all, Jenna Clake in Newcastle, then from Dom Bury in Devon, and we'll be hearing from Tishani Doshi in India, in Chennai, but it's now in the middle of the night in Chennai. So in fact, we've pre-recorded her contributions to this event. So we'll hear from each of them are going to read for 7 to 8 minutes. And then at the end of it, we'll have a discussion pre-recorded by Tashani with Dom Bury. And then we'll go back to live and you'll hear again from Dom Bury, but then with Jenna Clake. I won't say much about, I won't spend a lot of time introducing because we've got a lot of stuff to get on with the event. So what I'll do is I'll just first of all introduce the poets at the beginning of their readings. And we're going to start with Jenna. She's won an Eric Gregory Award. Her first collection, Fortune Cookie, was shortlisted for a Somerset Maugham Award. And her second collection is the one that's being published now, Museum of Ice Cream. So would you please welcome Jenna Clake?
Thank you, Neil. And thank you everyone for being here. It's an absolute honour to launch Museum of Ice Cream with Dom and Tashani and their wonderful books too. Museum of Ice Cream is a collection that looks at troubled relationships with food and thinks about loneliness and isolation, also how we aestheticize food through television and social media, and how we might make meaning in the world in our own ways. I like to think of my poems as being monologues spoken by characters, so they're very rarely spoken by me, and the things that happen in them aren't always true. So the parents in my first poem are not my parents, they'll be pleased to know. Wooden doll, total being. They were always saying that I had my father's nose, or my father's eyebrows, or my father's ears, until I saw my body like a wooden doll's, hanging together delicately, easily ripped apart. To argue, my parents went outside and stood around the corner of the house by the shed. There were marks where my father had kicked the wall. Suppose he was trying to get out rather than in. I wanted an argument, but there was no one to argue with. Went to the wall and kicked it, left marks over my father's. I had his legs now too, or his feet, whichever they said. I lay at the top of the stairs like a cat bored of chasing, tried to pull my nose off with my fingers. Then they said I had my father's hands, so what was I supposed to do? My mother came into my bedroom at night and touched my nose, eyebrows and ears and said, "How can you be upset to look like this?" She walked around in her underwear, all the slim, calm folds of her. There were mirrors everywhere and they felt cool against my skin. In this poem, I mention Agent Cooper, by which I mean Agent Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks. And Agent Cooper really likes food. I wanted Agent Cooper to save my life. When the door opened, it was Agent Cooper. He came and sat at my table. He said something about dead pies. And I said, "Do you know that is my favourite line?" He was smoothing the plastic tablecloth with his hands. I had never wanted a massage more. He said, "You know, we had to throw up all those donuts after we ate them." And I said, "Oh, don't tell me that." But it was too late, and I opened my eyes in the darkness, and I swung my feet to the floor. "Where are you going?" said my boyfriend. I said, "I have to get these donuts out of me." He rolled towards me and touched my back. He said, "I can't remember anything from the beginning of us. I rubbed my collarbone, as I always did. I think the collection also explores how eating disorders can often feel really isolating and make the experience of living basically feel impossible to talk about in some ways. And I think much of my writing, much more broadly, is really interested in our failures to communicate with one another. So this is a poem that thinks about that. Like other women. You might come out of your house dressed as a clown and meet another girl your age dressed as a clown. As you might go to the cinema together dressed as clowns and not eat popcorn. As you might, wearing your clown costumes underneath, try on new clothes and point out to each other where the clown suit is showing. As you might go to a restaurant and ask for 2 empty plates and roll your red noses around them. As you might, sitting in her bedroom as she is in the bathroom, find a drawer filled with eggs and oranges. As you might, whilst throwing up in the bathroom, worry about her finding your drawer filled with chocolate. As you might, send emails to keep each other on track. As you might direct each other to websites about how to be better clowns. As you might stop talking to your other friends in order to spend more time with her. As you both might wake up early to go for a run dressed as clowns. As you might want to take off your clown suit, but know that you need the other one to undo the zip. As you might hug each other at the end of the day and at the same time check that the other one is still wearing all the parts of her costume. I will just finish with a final short one for this section. And this is one of the few poems where everything happened, but it didn't necessarily happen in this order. Siesta for Olivia. My parents took me on holiday, and when we got to the beach, a girl from my dance class was there. We were best friends for 2 weeks. We climbed the rocks and watched people dive into the sea. The sea was the blue of a brand new pen. I would only eat chips with ketchup for dinner. Someone put squid on my plate and I screamed. A cockroach was squashed with a milk carton. It's possible to say that the holiday where the pizza got covered in flies was the start of all the trouble. When I got home, I realised that the scariest thing about everything is knowing it can't last, like a box of cereal or a bag of crisps or willpower. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. And now we're going to hear from Dom Berry, who's launching his first collection, Rite of Passage. And he is an environmental activist, as will be apparent from some of the poems. He won the National Poetry Competition in 2017. So, Dom, please.
Thanks, Neil. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Can you see me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Good news. So the reading tonight will be very much in 2 parts, and they really segment the journey that Rite of Passage hopes to take readers on. And that is a journey into the heart crack of the current planetary and environmental emergency we find ourselves in. The first section will be my own journey really into that heart crack, and the second section will be really coming out of that, of having gone into the grief and the heartbreak, the life that won't stop well afterwards, really sharing that this journey has to be here and we have to face it now in order to shift how we interact with ourselves, each other, and the earth. So without further ado, I'll read some poems. what my body showed me. This window, wiped suddenly clear in winter, shows the old wood up on the hill I stood in last autumn, just to cut an hour out of time, to absorb one season, giving birth to another. The huge trees stripping their own bones clean, until I felt I was no longer alone, that something else was moving, then stopping, then locking its breath against sound. I listened so intently then, I felt my own body leaving me. I followed it on, unwillingly on, until in a clearing up ahead, I could see something waiting, silent as the snow, as if it had been there all along, a human that had been taught nothing of love. It beckoned to me then. I was so afraid, but still I edged closer, till I could see this person's lidless eyes, their utter lack of skin, and hear the noise their mouth made, as if someone had shown them a film of the whole world burning on repeat, as if they had somehow lived. They spoke. Each morning feels now like stepping backwards into boiling rain. They said this, and at once I knew, and before me stood the body I will have to wear if all that can still be saved is lost. Hooray. The town tonight is like a little scuttled ship. The river closed with ice, and each road, each roof frost closeted. Still, in spite of this, in spite of snow, the roses push up blade by blade to shake out their small white fires and will not close. And I must confess, this stirs in me another road, another ice-clutched path that, despite the winter, would not close. Further down it I have walked, past the harbour, locked into the hills, to where the sea turns in its sleep, its one white eye half closed. And though I name this home, I feel it as a roof stripped off, a scab, an old wound which, despite the years, will still not close. Still, I cannot say which map or scroll of sky I'd use then to guide me back, or which alternate life I'd then had to close. And though it moves in me still, the sea, I know I can't get back to that same world, the tide, that time has now dragged closed. Snow country. Dawn over a white field. A fresh mantle of foot-deep snow, and two greying silhouettes, talking haltingly, moving haltingly, against the tree line, against the coming light that brings for them a final throw at what by now is critical. 5 a.m. and I'm bolt upright, sweating, with someone else's pain in my chest. Outside, it's snowing again. The lake, packed with ice, makes the sound of metal under an approaching train, snapping, tensing as the body does. We stand on the moors and watch as the clouds fold in. Lightning opens the sky like a flung knife, and for a second it's visible again. Your contortionist's grimace, that mask of shock that holds, then falls as the snow does, unfurling from the sky like a flag. It's spring, but it could be autumn. We sit in the garden, under the leafless rowan, in the same place you first told me, only now the snow is smeared with mud. Standing, I half expect you, mother, to keel right over. Carrying you back, I feel it, in the empty cup of my hands, your new weight. Grief is the loneliest animal. It hunts in the small hours, in the corridor between sleep and being in some form alive, in some way awake enough to hear you up again, rustling around the kitchen like a pile of dead leaves, drinking in the calm of first light that, if translated, would read solace, dusk over a white field, a smattering of new snow, and against the tree line, a single blackening silhouette, walking around like a child, holding a hand that isn't there. Why I have chosen not to have children. No part of me wants to remember the first time I felt it, dipping hands into the hen house to find each bird a cinder, each egg still scalding hot, not yet hatched. Later, climbing fields to find cattle birthing the huge black coals of their calves, alive at least until the ash piles cool and the last cow splits. Even our midwives with oven mitts cannot claim our infants' new fevers. Softly they sing, knowing something else burns through them with the lymph in the limbs. I feel it too, but say nothing. Now I can hear drought knocking through the forest. Each birch, each branch, each blade of wood, a time-sprung match. This is how we come to love only what will not kindle. The flax mud and the estuary still feeding the sea. The damp soil I press into my lover's mouth, pleading, now only the eyeless stand and signal for weather. I have heard thunder shake out the whole sky and bear none. And to think we thought the boatman's song no warning, how we sold him all our rain, then cut him dumb. And I'll finish this section with a very short poem called All I Can Offer You Is This. All I can offer you is this. How one evening each autumn, a little after dark, the swallows return home. How you can hear then in the roof their wings clicking closed, the hive mind shutting down each map that followed without intention another map to these eaves. This house, I come alive here, then I heal. But this autumn the swallows have not come home. The kitchen is silent for the click of the clock and the whir of the drum and the hum of the stove and the drone of the telephone. And the world is now lighter, yet somehow also more heavy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dom. Before we move on to Tashani, I'd just like to say if you in the audience have any questions or comments you want to make, do put them in the YouTube chat and they'll be relayed to me to bring up at the discussion at the end. But because Tashani isn't here live, obviously she won't be able to respond to what you say, but you can always say nice things about her poems as well. So we're going to hear now from Tishani Doshi. She won the Forward Prize for Best First Collection with her book Countries of the Body, and that was followed by 3 collections now from Bloodaxe, Everything Begins Elsewhere, Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, and now the new collection, A God at the Door. So we're now going to move to Chennai in India, and we're going to hear a short set of poems from Tishani.
Every unbearable thing. Say you began as rib or clod of earth. Say you were blossoming until someone stared too long at your shirt and leaned in, unbuttoned, pushed, forced. Don't mistake me. This is not a poem against longing, but against the kind of one-way desire that herds you into a dead-end alley, and how this can lead to a weakened epidermis and despair and nights of howling, and who can you tell except mother, friend, cat, while sky keeps on being sky and streets fill with danger. Say you survive, and mostly you're okay, because turns out you can carry cauldrons of hurt and your heart is as strong as a giant carbon atom. Say you gather sisters and tell each other legends about when women were keepers of the universe, when gardens proliferated between our thighs, and even if we were hacked and scattered over the earth, temples would grow from the bits of us. Even the cosmos, seriously, the cosmos stemmed from us. In other words, we were the beginning, the origin of the world. Say all this has vanished like the great auks, those awkward, flightless birds mistaken for witches. Say those legends have gone into a kind of extinction and we have grown silent as an underground stream, and every now and again one of us would amass enough steam to plunge off a cliff like a waterfall shouting a name, and even though the noise she made was thunderous, nobody heard and she disappeared, and we did not ask where she went to or why. Heart, atom, danger, the beginning, once the origin. And it is hard to say why our ears and tongues went off to be pilgrims in the valley of silence without leaving a note, or how the thorns got plucked from our throats. But now they've returned, we must make up the beds and unpack the cases. We must listen to every unbearable thing until we too can name our unbearable things, until the sound of unbearable is deafening. And it is like the fairy tale after a long spell of sleep. It is wake up, people, it is time to find our way back. Bridges are burning and towers have collapsed, and some will say the witches are returning. But really, it is the world asking to be made again. So let us bring flowers, let us bow down, let us worship and reveal our scars. Let us. Listening to Abda Parveen on loop, I understand why I miss home and why it must be so. This frugal diet of living is getting to me. Sometimes in the desert, the wind will blow through my shell-shaped ears and whisper a sea song just to taunt me. If the end game is to renounce house, mother, father, husband, sibling, succulent, child, to go in search of better hummus and woolen blankets, to choose one dog and run for the border, I'm not sure this contest was made for me. What if the dog ignores me? What if he refuses water from the tin cup I lay out for him? What if we become estranged like Enkidu, ancient wanderer, and his herd? What if my dog finds a family of wolves and abandons me? What if I felt my heart was taken out of me? I could begin each day with praise, could serve and work without once uttering the word home, could write on multiple clay tablets, could even practice hieroglyphs, the symbol for voyage, a torn out eye, falling man with blood streaming from head, Apis, Nandi, cosmic bull running into me. I would do it if it meant I could go back and everything would be as I left it. Bread on table, bowl of salt, apple tree, river and its stepping stones returned to me. What if it was better to live with radiation than with war? What if home was Chernobyl? What if the well was poisoned but the bird song made up for it? What if the ghosts of all the shot dogs went to live underground with the worms? What if you didn't wake up asking, did it all really happen to me? What if we were birds forced to spend our lives in air, to mate and sleep on the wing, to rope round and round the earth in circles and have screaming parties? What if we were never meant to settle? Would you still search out my beak midair? Would you still find me? We are homesick everywhere. Even when we are home, we are empty things that need filling. We are always lost in love. never found. Please come find me. What if this minaret was like the last tooth in my head, unsteady and inflamed with devotion? What if I'm finally old and ready for the plant of rejuvenation, but no one's offering it to me? We're at that moment in the journey when we've hit a wall, and the only way to scale it is to use your voice with its inflections, its ditches and rough grain and longing. What if God on the other side of that wall was equally alone and in need of company? What if we replaced God with home? What if I was ready to become nothing? What if I understood there was no me? Would you carry me to this divinity? Advice for Pliny the Elder, big daddy of mansplainers. I'd like you to show you the poem. It's in the shape of a menstrual cup. Great man, now that you are dead, allow me to squeeze your hand. The sage bushes in Umbria are heavy with bees, so I'm killing them with hypnosis. I am a mere woman, inferior lettuce. But I understand swoon, aka mirabilia. I fill this cup with nectar and offer it to soothe your Vesuvian wounds. I share your love of baths and classifications, and sure, if we had to point to a god in the sky, why not call him Thunderbolt? I too believe sewers are the great architectural invention. I do all my searching on roads. It has been 2,000 years, so we can forgive some of your assertions. The sea mouse who helps whales find their way by parting the brows above their eyes. The one-eyed humans and skyopods with umbrella feet, the whole exotic bestiary. If I had no mouth but could live off the smell of apples, I'd move to Kashmir. Scratch that, maybe Sussex. Once a month when the blood comes, I go out to lie in whatever field I find, to feel the scorch rise and the crops wither. Our powers are much depleted. I can stand among men in full swing of my menstruous, but nothing will dim their ability to tell me about me. There are birds at the window this morning I can't name, and dogs in the valley beyond who are using their bell-shaped lungs to announce their happiness again and again and again. Nothing has changed. We worry about the wane and winnow. In your time, perhaps the ladies used bits of cut-up smocks, but these days we have menstrual cups. Desire is still a kind of ruin. That silly bird fluttering against the window net, trying to get in, the body's steady lilt towards oblivion. They say you had a sister like Shakespeare's, mostly overlooked, that it was she who first noticed the smoky clouds which sent you on your way. Dear Pliny, I guess you never heard the one about curiosity. The cat is real. The earth never tires of giving birth. If you get too close to a volcano, you should know it may erupt.
Thank you. This now is the poem, the last poem, which Tashani was reading. Just thought it's worth showing that. We're going to continue now with Jenna and then Dom, and then we'll go back to Tashani. Also, I'd like to point out on the YouTube page immediately below the screen, there are details of all the books. So do click on the screen afterwards and browse the website and do buy the books. I'm sure the poets will be delighted. Unfortunately, they won't be able to sign them tonight. So I'd like now to introduce Jenna to read her second set of poems. Jenna.
Thank you, Neil. So in the second half of the collection, or roughly speaking, I started to think about how we create systems of meaning in our lives. Throughout the collection are these small simulations, kind of interstitial poems that I have named simulations. And I was thinking when writing those about how living with an eating disorder is like living in your own simulation of your own rules that apply to you. So you create a world that is just your own, and that can feel really isolating. But one of the more positive ways I've made meaning in my life is through TV. So this poem is after the OC. It's no longer about us. It's got to be about me. What if my life is a film where I'm a teenage girl and I'm dating an older man, say like 17 and 28, and my parents are aware, and I have an internet stalker, but I've been ignoring him, and I'm American and white. We all are. And I'm in the car with my mother and my younger brother, say like 40 and 14, and I'm driving the black Range Rover I was given for my 16th birthday. And every time my stomach growls, I turn the radio up. And the radio happens to be playing mine and my boyfriend's song. And my mother says, "Honey, are you happy?" And I say, "I'm really happy, I love our song." And my mother says, "What is it?" And I'm wearing this headband that has panda ears attached to it, so I look like a panda. And it keeps slipping down, so I keep on pushing it up. And I ask my mother to check the traffic to see if I can turn at a junction. And my brother is texting silently in the back. And he says, "Can we go to McDonald's?" And I say, "Sure." And at the drive-through, he gets a burger, some fries, and a milkshake. And my mother asks for napkins and a donut. And I get nothing. And 5 minutes later, my brother says, "I'm still hungry, I should have got the apple pie." And at the same time, my internet stalker arrives at my older boyfriend's house. And my boyfriend lets him in because he thinks the stalker is my friend. And my stalker is wearing a black hoodie and panda ears like mine. And when my boyfriend has let him in, my stalker says, "I am here to kidnap you." And my boyfriend says, "Why?" And then my stalker says that he loves me. And he uses my name, which is something cool and American like Avery or Aubrey. And my boyfriend and my stalker argue. And my stalker says, "Why did you let me in?" And my boyfriend says that he thought my stalker was another friend of mine. And he uses their name, which is also something cool and American, like Jackson or Brandon. And my stalker says, "Jackson or Brandon? Our body types are totally different." And I'm still driving in the car with my mother and brother, and it's not clear where we're going. And I ask my brother to open the window to get rid of the smell of burger, and my phone keeps on going off. And because I'm in America, I can answer it, so I do. And it's my internet stalker calling, but he has one of those voice changes. And he says, "If you ever want to see your boyfriend again, you need to bring me 10 unmelted ice creams in the next hour." And I definitely know where to find him, even though he hasn't given me his location. And I do a U-turn in the middle of traffic, and no one gets hurt. And I'm wearing a very cute top and some shorts, and the outfit shows off my fragile frame. And it's not unusual because every girl I know has a body like mine. And at the same time, my boyfriend wakes up and my internet stalker has tied him to the bed by his ankle. And as my boyfriend comes round, he realizes he's not in his own bedroom. And he starts shouting my name and pulling at the ankle strap. And I've got the 10 ice creams. And my mother is holding them in her lap. And she's telling me the quickest way to my stalker's location, which is obviously the beach. And the ice cream is beginning to run down the side of the cones. And my brother is doing some internet research and has figured out who my internet stalker is. And we are all shocked. And we've got one ice cream of each flavour because it's so much better visually. And as I'm driving, I think for a moment about pulling over and eating all the ice creams and letting my stomach be quiet for a while. And then I realise I can't ruin the moment where my mother finally accepts my boyfriend and convinces my father that he's actually all right, and where my brother and I will finally get one another. So I keep on driving. Self-portrait as a pink dressing room. Crack an egg in half and see how a person always has a story about finding a chick inside the shell. And then you dream of this person doing the saddest thing, making their own birthday cake. They would pick two flavours that reminded them of someone, strawberry and rhubarb, forgetting that one will overpower the other. Sadder still, to put some in your mouth and find it has gone sour. Imagine everyone decided to wear the blue of a J-cloth on the same day, but you wore pink. I leave flour on my clothes, so it looks like I've been touched. I will just finish with one more poem. I like to also think of the collection as sort of being a love letter to Newcastle, as I moved here as I was finishing writing it. I try to make sense of things by standing very close to windows. Morning felt like an ungraceful attempt to pull myself onto the side of a swimming pool. I wanted to dream of sash windows, iced coffee mixing with milk, a yellow cup and buttercream, the cold air hitting the room kindly. I was asked to draw around my silhouette in profile. I was shocked and frightened by the shape of my nose. I wondered how to make my life better and concluded that all I needed was a white apartment and a couple of chairs, 3 slices of quiche, a lily pad of desire. It was too cold to go in the sea, but too warm to wear a coat. I touched white scarves until I became vanilla. Like seagulls roosting on thin ledges, bridges, everyone was pregnant or dying or wrongly visiting a deli counter looking for the perfect peach. I took a photo of my silhouette. It was a friend covering their face with an umbrella, blue and white striped curtains knocking over a vase, a woman leaving the pharmacy crying. I tapped the powder from a custard donut onto a plate. It was like being given permission to grow my body hair. It had something to do with respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. And now we'll hear again from Dom Berry. Dom.
Thanks, Neil. Afterwards. It is in fact remarkably hard to kill something completely, even a human with what it believes is rightfully his struggles, the chicken still throbbing around his feet with a half-lopped head. Even a continent utterly raped fires up new shoots, species eventually. Even the birds on the scorched wires of their wings return. And can you blame me if, knowing this, I lie flat on the ground to feel the hot stones taking off all my clothes, my red body still smoking, still alive with all the required ecstasy? Let it be so. Let us build something more than we believe our bodies are capable of. For what we believe is human is broken. Pray, let these flames fold free to do their own swift work. And this is the moment, I guess, in the collection, which is a requiem in 4 parts, where we've kind of come to the edge of extinction, and the inherent life of living still wants to burst through. And this is what really happened to me. And this next poem is called Seeing the Whole World Kindling. And it really is a poem about my own journey through illness, of facing the anxiety inherent in writing these poems and being in bed for a year and a half, 2 years, not able to really function because of feeling that. And it's called Seeing the Whole World Begin Kindling. Seeing the whole world begin kindling, I had no choice but shut myself off from it. From the blue sky and the sea, and the salmon lashing its black water white. Too long from the woods that breathe me, and the soil that is now being burnt away, until illness came thicker than any kind of dark water, and laid me out, gave me a bed and 2 long years to sweat through. Outside, the world went on. Inside, fever rolled across my body's new landscape, and I dragged myself to each of its craggy edges, begging for a cure. I would have swallowed all of Eden then, to be given back a miracle. Nothing but more heat came, and I crawled back inside and collapsed back in bed for another year, until I was so afraid, until I began to dream the dreams no human should dream, of Europe in front of me like a burnt out cathedral, of all those I love dying on repeat. I wept so wildly then. I, a grown man, wept and shook until I was no longer afraid of dying, until I felt something other than the voices of my own domestication wake in me, and the life that deserted me drip back in, slowly at first, then at a rush. Then the whole room was full of fresh water, and a new voice came rising up from a deeper well, shouting, "Stand now for the life you have been given. Stand so that others may find courage in these times to do so too." And so I hauled myself up and out of bed, and dragged the carcass of all my old life downstairs, and threw it out into the garden, and banged my hands on the hard ground, and prayed for the earth's sap to rise up through me again, like a purer kind of water, electric to the touch of my new skin. I prayed for the strength in my own bones then, for the guidance of my heart crashing in its cage, for my soul that I had left too long to walk someone else's road. It calls out to me now, as the wheeling buzzard calls. It says, "Listen to what I ask of you. Stand out tonight under the dark sky. Wait for a greater pulse to rise up through you there. Let it guide you towards resurrection." It says, "Run naked out onto your street, singing for the soil and the soft earth. It needs you now to burn inside as brightly as the forests outside burn. The ashes these mad times bring are here for rising out of." It says, "Never doubt that if you answer stubbornly the sound of your wild heart beating, that the one house we live in will one day be green again." Oh, deep breath. Threshold. Oh, hang on, wait. One poem before Threshold. This is the last few sections from a longer poem called Metamorphosis. And it is at this stage, after we've come through this moment, that things start to emerge again, and we begin to have rejuvenation and upwelling and new life being born. This was the only way it could have been. Our own extinction held up to offer a small window shaken ajar at midnight, for us to witness these charred fields and begin to feel something, anything again, to understand how each cut into the earth is a cut into our own soft skin. In the compressed heat of this late age, the soul of the world begins to emerge again, timid at first after 10,000 years of crucifixion, of being burnt alive for the simple crime of sounding the raw, wild note of love over and over, for daring to say, look, between the ash and the wide open cosmos, there is still magic here. So the world breaks apart to break us open, to the subtle miracle of living, to come back to the mystery of these hands folding over themselves, to feel the wild tingling in us and the last woods whispering, soon there will be glades, great elk, grace again. Old things awaken far out on the permafrost. New fires, hidden in the high woods, flare on one by one to warm a little meager food. And slowly we recall what we had forgotten, to sense in the marrow of the earth God again. The God not as this far-off deity sat on his golden throne, but God as life, as you, as me, as everything. All of this to finally remember the deep dark of the earth alive in us again, the thrumming tuning fork of our bodies, ecstatic as wave spray, sudden phosphorescence, to feel how the sun, the stars, and the moon move us, hung in the sky over the still lake, below a mountain filled with fresh snow. And I'll finish with the second last poem in the book called Threshold. And so we go now as one into the gathering darkness, not knowing how long the night will last, or even if a different world will come at all, but destined now to walk as one humanity this road together. And so we light our fires and wait without hope together, for hope would be hope of the wrong dawn. As we hold each other close and wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong future. Make no mistake, this is the hour we rise or fall together. This is the hour we face our own extinction and choose whether we live or whether we die together. Yes, love, the hour is not of our choosing. Yes, love, I too sometimes would want to be born to another life than this. And yet, in that same breath, I know how nothing has gone wrong, been broken, thrown out of kilter, that we have now to be taken to the edge of death to choose as one how we live. This becomes then the most sacred of mirrors. Will you stand by me in its dark glare a while? Will you feel me shudder and allow yourself to fully shudder also? For all it asks of us to give up is our unwillingness to surrender, the fragile shrouds and masks we choose to wear, to break open to ourselves again. This is for me the way forward now, to keep on trusting moment by moment, this feeling deep in my bones that says, out of the rubble of this one, a new world is going to come. So if we have to be taken to the edge of death, to come back in the very nick of time to life, to our collective love, to understand what it means to be human, let it be so. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dom. And now we're going to go back to India to hear from Tishani reading a further set of poems. And at the end of her reading, we'll be going straight to a pre-recorded chat between her and Dom Bury about the environmental aspects of their poetry. So if you have any comments or questions you want to put in the chat, do feed them through. And we'll sit back now and listen to Tishani. At the end of the discussion between her and Dom, we'll come back live with Dom and Jenna. So we'll now hear from Tishani.
This next poem is written to commemorate the lives of the 1.5 million Indian soldiers who served in the Great War, and it uses extracts from their letters written home. Many good and wonderful things. History, too, has a hard time remembering the black waters they crossed, the small mountain villages emptied of men. Death was different then. History is always reinventing itself. Say what you will, but clouds have remained more or less the same, and leaving home is still leaving home, whether it's on a jet plane or climbing the steep path behind the house with a roll of bedding on your back. But to die in a faraway place whose name you can't pronounce for a king who isn't really yours is a sadness history still hasn't figured out. History has been pushing for republics since Lucius Junius Brutus, but men are hardy as the point or bull-headed. And you'd think the glories of lice making mansions in their shirts was a paradise they could do without, that trench living would make them walk across the front with arms held high, saying, "Take me quick, I wish only to enter the realms of God." History tries not to be sentimental, although letters give things away. One fool longed for a flute. The world is burning, but he wants to play. Others were gluttons, mercenaries, spies. The wise asked for opium, but right sweets or dainties, they said, otherwise the package might not reach. History needs to forget the dead who cover the earth like heaps of stones, who write, "Mother, is my parrot still alive? Mother, do not go wandering madly." Sometimes it feels as though the rain has been falling all your life and the girl you married will tire of tending the cattle. Do not worry. This is war where the women, like metaphors, are always steadfast and beautiful. In history's version, she sits under the peepal tree, your Victoria Cross pinned to her sari. She has been waiting since 1918 and she is waiting still. So let us speak about love the way we always have, by asking, "Have you eaten, darling? And what price did you get for the goats? And of course I miss you, but the earth is hard and the sky distant. And if I had wings, I'd fly to you." In Marseille, they said we look like kings. History cannot really say what happens to men at war, so listen. At night I feed on stars. Do not ask about the cold. They have given me whale oil for my feet, and someone told me if I carried a piece of raw onion into battle, the bullets would not find me. Pilgrimage. Every now and then the universe hands out treats. A cryogenic pod for Christmas, a family trip to Greece. We stare like pigeons at our feeders, impatient for the next gift to drop, sprouting stress bars on our feathers at the bounty of some other pigeon's trough. We were taught to show devotion by walking in circles. We had visions in caves, and when the host served an aperitif of fermented mare's milk, we drank it with grace. We walked barefoot, keeping the center to our right, measured paces between shrines and twilight. These days we take the video coach, but still bring baskets of marigold. In times of war, we go from cot to cot, whispering sweet nothings into soldiers' ears. We write letters to their beloveds and preserve their relics. Toothpick, comb, bone. How else to arrive at the ecstasy of ourselves if we cannot see another's body? The world has its unknown territories, its dragons. We wander about with blindfolds shouting, Marco. Only the devil responds, Polo. It is all remembrance, to repeat and repeat again the names of what we deem holy. Sometimes we move so far we forget where we've been. It's like looking at an old picture of your face. The earth holds all our dead, all our half-eaten apples, and still it has space. We make circuits around history with lamps and portable altars of fire. Feel the thrill of ghosting in footsteps of gods and demons. Remember this hill where you were crucified? This spot in the river where you tore out your breast and flung it at the cursed city? Remember this sky you forgot in your room, confusing the blue of the screen for the cosmos within? No matter how many nights you spend in exile, remember, pilgrim, you come home to the skin. Thank you very much. My name is Tishani Doshi, and you've been listening to Poems from a God at the Door.
Well, thank you very much, Tashani, for that beautiful reading. We're now continuing in pre-recorded mode. I'm now having a discussion with Tishani and Dom, which happened last week, because this is a chance to actually get Tishani to say something about her work and for her to talk to Dom about the parallels that there are between the two books. So the poem you just read, Tashani, Pilgrim, ends with the line, no matter how many nights you spend in exile, you come home to their skin. And also in listening to Abida Parveen, that poem, you wrote, we're homesick everywhere, even when we're home. And that for me sets off a parallel with Dom's poem, which he read earlier, the He Writhe poem. I was wondering whether you could say something about that sense of home and body and grounding in relation to writing about you and the environment.
Thanks, Neil. I guess, the body has been a constant source of investigation for me in poetry and dance. And I feel that the body is the first step before I do anything. And this is the thing that we carry around. And what is our relationship with the body? And that surely mirrors our place or relationship with the larger environment that we inhabit. And so it's very interesting to me, this idea of, I guess what I've been thinking a lot about for a long time, but particularly last year, was the sense of what is holy anymore and where do we find divinity? And in many of the things I've been reading about, there's this need or demand to come back to oneself. So no matter what the journey, where the traveling goes, to arrive back at oneself and to recognize, I suppose, the divinity within oneself. And so the body then becomes this curious container of disappointments and hardships, but also beauty and joy, and the way that we connect to the larger world, to the cosmos. So I think in both those poems, there's this sense of a tussle between, I suppose, the fragmentation that is always threatening the body, but the unity and the wholeness that the body occasionally gives us glimpses of, which is something of a miracle.
Dom, how does that chime with your work, do you think?
Very closely, I think. I think for me, writing these poems, it was the body, it is the body still that has always given me that access point into the work, into the feeling sense of my own body, our own bodies reacting to the outside world, to what's happening now, and how, it's the body which keeps a score in many ways, and how we're holding in these poems, and also in Tashani's poems, this weird, almost intoxicating, and yet at the same time terrifying mixture of grief and heartbreak and longing for this crack now in our environment, to actually birth like something which is around our own divinity. As Tishani says, this remembering again of home within ourselves. And yeah, so for me, it chimes very, very clearly. One thing I'd say, I guess, is that what I really appreciated reading Tashani's poems was always this, this ferocity and this tenderness, which only the body can really bring forth. Like the mind can't bring forth that feeling and that truth in the poems. And I think when we bring the body into the poems and begin to speak and write from that more visceral and yet beautiful place, actually that's when like core messages can actually be shared and transmuted between a poet and a reader. And yeah, so for me, that is, the body is the portal into both the divine, but also into the poem, the poets, the readers reading the poem. And yeah, if that makes sense.
It does. I just want to also say, reading your work, Tom, I think what I really appreciated was the many chances of healing that you allow. And there's a lot of burning, there's a lot of trauma that is also recorded, environmental trauma, but there's also this sense of hope and healing. And that, again, I'm thinking of this last year where we've lived such disembodied experiences. Everything has been two-dimensional behind the screen, and our bodies are alone and in their spaces and afraid to meet other bodies. And so more than ever, there's this sense of asserting the primacy of the body, and that somehow that connection of body to other body, but also body to land and body to earth is so important, because we feel further away from it, I think.
Tishani, your opening poem, Every Unbearable Thing, was also about survival, wasn't it? That combination of personal survival and environmental survival. How much do you feel that particularly in India?
I think this sense of, there's this idea of, I always think of a story that Katse was talking about, the South African writer, and talking about listening to these birds in the place that he lived. And he said, it seemed to me that the birds were insisting, I am, this song every day of saying, I'm here. And that's always stayed with me. And that's always, to me, been a sense of what I think of survival and what I think art is doing, and what humans are capable of is this huge amount of terror and horror, but also this capacity for creating beauty. And so for me, survival is, particularly with poetry, is about reclamation. It is about saying, we're here, and what are we going to do? And so it's not so much about taking the position of victim, but kind of raising it to something that is potentially transformative, so that it can become something else, something that is actually bearable as opposed to unbearable, if that makes sense.
And in many of your other poems, you're also very much writing about how things are here or there in the case of India, because you're responding very intensely to news stories in many cases.
Yeah, a lot of the poems have been triggered by news items, and some of them are very serious and difficult, and others are sort of more funny. And there's a sense of, I suppose, with these poems, of somehow the direction coming from outward in rather than in out. I've noticed that a lot of the time reading something in a paper, and that desensitized language that the news has, and how we then make ourselves human by responding to that. And so the poems are also doing that. And obviously, India has been, ranked as one of the most dangerous places in the world for a woman to live in. And so to have this body of a woman to go through the environment as a woman with privileges, but with this ever sense of feeling of danger, and where do you draw your strength, and how do you create your space? So I think a lot of the poems are working on an individual level, but also thinking about the collective, because after all, feminism is never about the fact of am I comfortable or am I safe, but it's looking out to the larger community of women, and then to the society around that. So yeah, I think the poems are trying to work on all those levels.
And formally, you've also changed a lot compared with your previous books. You're now using shaped poems, for example, and you're trying to relate shape in a poem, form in a poem, to what the poem is actually saying. That last poem you read, Pilgrimage, is one of those, but there was another one too, which was shaped in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the advice to Pliny the Elder is shaped as a menstrual cup, and it's because Pliny had such outrageous ideas about menstruation and how terrible it was. And so in a way, that's a bit of tongue-in-cheek to sort of say, here you go, Pliny, here's a menstrual cup, I offer this to soothe your Vesuvian wounds. And I think partly shape is also power. If you think of forms like yantras, or think of just any forms that have been used to, it contains certain powers and ideas. And so I think, why not in a poem? Why does the poem only have to be for the ear? Why can't the poem also work on the level of the shape and what it contains and how those words are held? So I think it's an extra level of play. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that the shape has purpose, and that it adds to the poem as opposed to just being gratuitous. So,
and Dom, that's true of your book also, isn't it? Your book has been written over many years, and over that time your work has gone through quite a lot of transformations, but you have arrived at ways of making each poem work formally in relation to what it's drawing upon.
Hopefully. Hopefully that's happened. Yeah, I think for me, like the marriage of form and like lyric and image is just so necessary to bring these big themes, but also the rawness and the intensity of these poems through. So as Tashani was talking then about her poem about Pliny the Elder, like it resonated so strongly because you almost need to give the structure of the poem and to allow the magic of these intense and very raw and visceral poems to come through. It was interesting. I was hearing Tashani speak there, and one of her poems actually leapt to mind, and it's from Every Unbearable Thing, and it was about how it is in these moments where, like, I think the lines were, it is wake up, people, it is time to find our way back, bridges are burning and towers have collapsed, and some will say the witches are returning, but really it is the world asking to be made again. And for me, just hearing that resonated back between our poems was just so strong. It's this remembering again, and I think the form allows us to condense in some way when we read it. Thank you.
And in Metamorphosis, you have a line, how each cut into the earth is a cut into our own skin. And you've just been talking there about rawness, but at the same time, you're writing work which is very finished, very exact. It's both raw and exact. And I'm wondering whether that relates to in any way to your perspective on extinction.
Wow, okay. Hang on, that's a big question. Let me just digest that. Rawness, exactness, extinction. Okay, here we go. I think when it comes to extinction and the place in which we currently find ourselves, we find ourselves on this teetering point of knowing, of feeling the world around us and the rawness of the world around us in our own bodies. And we feel the possibility of the world in which we love and which we hold dear and which we find magic in slowly dying. And yet it condenses in some way. And for me, the extinction part of it is allowing ourselves right now to face, I think, as hopefully my poems do, and also how Tashani's poems do as well, to face the cold, raw reality of where we are, but also to find like the heart crack in that, to find the heart crack of in that rawness, actually the beauty that actually allows the light in and says, we have had to come to this moment in order to shift, in order to find that divinity which we've both been speaking about. And so I guess that is it, that the precision also is necessary, not to just be in the emotion of the poem, but to be incredibly precise in terms of what you're giving people as an access point into the poems.
Yeah, Tishani, coming back to you on extinction. Extinction Rebellion has been very much in the news in bringing those issues to the fore over the past couple of years. How do you see the poet's role in relation to writing about political and social and environmental issues while still writing poetry, not writing agitprop?
Yeah, there's this sense of wanting to, which I think actually poetry is very well placed to do compared to other forms of writing. There is an elasticity of poetry, an immediacy of poetry. So poems are able to respond very quickly to everything that's happening around us at the moment. And I think as well, poems are capable of what Dom was talking about, to still keep the lyric as its center. So you can have this sense of timelessness in a poem that is universal, that is speaking of all times, but you can also have a poem that's speaking of the now, of something that we read either in the newspaper or you heard on the news. And a poem can do both those things. It can hold the now and it can also be timeless. And I think that's what I'm trying to do. And I feel like that's what I expect, why poetry can be so powerful to so many people is because it gives us this bridge in some way. And so we're not recording facts and we're not writing manifestos, but we are allowing people to hold the disparities, and somehow that feels like the only thing that and to find our balance somehow, and to try to negotiate how things may be, or how we may dare to hope or dream. And I think all these are the territory of poetry.
I'd love to respond to that as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
And just to echo what Tashani is saying, is that while we can, like in these times, as the understanding of truth and false news becomes more and more, and where we get our news is disseminated, and we're in this place of uncertainty, and what it becomes, especially around environmentalism and climate change, is this almost this head tennis where we're in a room of almost jackdaws and sounding like overexcited pinball machines, where the rhetoric is just ping, 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 and you can't quite make sense of actually what you're feeling. Actually, that's where the poem comes in. Like truly, that's where the poem comes in, because it enters that deeper space in you, in the cells of your body, that actually allow you to shift and to feel and to alter. So for me, like poetry in the next 10, 20 years, we're already seeing it in the last 5-10 years, I think will play a larger and larger role in these times of shift and transformation. So I'm very juiced about this and the role poetry can play, because I feel it's significant.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank Tishani for her contribution to this event, and we're going to now switch over to live mode. So I'm going to move out of the kitchen and sort of zoom forward by a week, and I'm about to be back live with Dom and with Jenna in the live event. So thank you very much for Tishani.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tashani.
And here I am in the live event. I'm back with Dom and with Jenna. And I'd also like to thank Pete Hebden of NCLA, Newcastle Centre for Literary Arts, who's been doing a great techie job for us tonight. I think it's time we heard something from Jenna. In that discussion, both Dom and Tishani were talking a lot about the body, and that's very much the centre of a lot of your work. Also, consumption. So much of it is about food. I think there were 3 donuts in the poems you read tonight, but also throwing up in 2 poems. And so there's that opposition all the time. It made me think of consumption, that consumption is all about consuming, but also in terms of disease, the old disease of tuberculosis, consumption was a wasting thing. And you've got that double thing going on in your work all the time. Would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting to hear Dom and Tashani talking about how the body works in their poetry, because I think it works in a very similar way in mine, but the kind of end goal is slightly different. I think connection with the body kind of brings joy or kind of hope in their work, whereas when I was writing these poems, I was thinking about the ways that having a body can really feel like a burden in a lot of ways, especially if one has a troubled relationship with food. It can almost feel like a plague in itself to have a body and work through that. So I think that opposition of kind of consuming something then wanting to kind of reject that is very important, but also very much linked to a kind of existential dread for me, and that kind of difficulty in communicating in the way that food generally to people is a way to commune with others, to find a point of connection, to have a kind of social life. And what I want to explore is what happens when that gets problematized. How will you start to make secrets and try and hide that problem, and therefore make communication even more difficult?
There's also, I mean, I mentioned that double sense in your work. There's also mirroring, I noticed in your work, that in the Wooden Doll poem, the mirroring is about you mirroring the parents, whether they're real or imaginary. And then you've got the clowns, which is also about mirroring. Is that something you're conscious of?
Yeah, I think it's so when I was writing the poems, I did a lot of reading of accounts of people with eating disorders, and a lot of thinking about how communities of people suffering with eating disorders are made, and how problematic those communities can be. So when they're set up, they're often set up as a support community, but what happens is the sharing of troubling habits can be kind of passed on to people, and what tends to happen is a kind of loss of identity, I suppose. So that mirroring is really there to think about how in that troubled relationship with food, in that failure to communicate, it's kind of trying to reach out and find some meaning, find something to mirror and mimic, but finding also that is difficult and impossible too.
And in their discussion, they were also talking about the formal aspects of work and shaped poems and that kind of thing. And in your reading tonight, you read a number of prose poems, and you also have poems where there are spaces all through the prose, like breathing spaces. I was wondering whether you could say something about that and how it works in relation to your poems.
Yes, so I'm a big fan of the prose poem. I love a good prose poem, and the reason being that I feel like it gives me as a writer space to do whatever I want. Although it seems like a constrained space, actually, without having the line breaks, I'm able to take the poem in more interesting avenues of kind of blurring reality and imagination, blurring a narrative, a kind of linear narrative, and it really allows me as a writer, when I come to the page, to do what I want, really, to break all the rules. But I was aware that that was sort of a crutch for me as a writer. And then I was thinking about how in some of those poems, so like Quayside of Dogs and Jen's Sweet Shop, both of those poems are kind of about that sense of persona and identity really breaking down, and the idea that people around these speakers can see that things are not going well, that things are breaking down. So I really wanted to insert those spaces into those prose poems to kind of bring up a fragmentation and reflect that fragmentation quite clearly on the page.
Mm. You've both read each other's books before this event, and I did ask you whether there was anything you wanted to ask each other about your work. And Dom has just put up his hand, so you have first go, Dom. And you're still muted.
Muted, but you can hear me. Maybe
I can hear you now.
Good, great. Yeah, I think when I was reading through Jenna's book, like just kind of what struck me most was this tension which she holds the reader in, where it's almost there's something that's not being revealed quite to the reader, and you know that in each poem there may actually be nothing ever revealed, and yet the tension is still there. And I'm very curious as to, in terms of like, that's felt like an ongoing like trope, almost like to keep, like it's that sense of almost dread and terror, which is something which is still unseen but not spoken. I'm just really curious about how that was created, or how you felt it was created, Jenna.
Thank you. That's really perceptive and very kind of you. Thank you. Yeah, I think. Well, I think trying to express something that difficult is impossible to do simply, and I think that tension comes from there. But also, I really like to play with my readers' expectations, and really, it's almost a game of frustration of kind of doing that revealing, concealing thing, and to see how long I can you know, the really long poem I read out in my reading, it is a game of seeing how long I can keep someone's attention for, how long I can keep on spinning out this narrative to get somewhere or nowhere, perhaps. And I think that does come, you kind of mentioned terror and dread, and yeah, it comes from that kind of sense that it's impossible to communicate. So I'm going to try my best, but I can't. And that really comes from a sense of, can any of us really communicate? As writers, I think we're always trying to say what we want to say a bit better every time. And whether we get there or not is determined by an entire career, probably.
Yeah. No, I really go on, sorry now.
I was going to say, you've got Agent Cooper from Twin Peaks in one poem, haven't you? And that is
Yes.
very much a Twin Peaks kind of trope as well that you're using in poems. Not just that poem, but a number of those poems.
Yes, yeah, I'm a big Lynch fan, big surrealist fan. So yeah, I think that kind of spinning out a story, making it have lots of twists and turns and non sequiturs is something I'm really interested in my work generally. Yeah. I have a question for Dom, if that's okay. I know that you, in your discussion, you and Tishani touched on very briefly ash, I think, but I was really interested in that as a recurring image in your collection, and especially I was really struck by the image of the kittens in Hunger, and I just wondered if you could say something about that kind of recurring image of ash. I think it gets touched to someone's lips in another poem, perhaps, or yeah, I'm quite interested in that as a recurring.
Sure. I guess for me, the more and more I wrote into the collection, the more ash began to symbolize that transition between states. I think, for example, there's particularly one poem, end of one very long, very, like, I call it like a very hypnotic or like chaotic poem, which is Love as a Project for Small Children with Eyelids. which the speaker, I think, says, or alludes to the ash, but like ash, yes, like I'm only willing to taste fire if I can taste ash giving old life to what is new. And so there's that very singular point of renewal and rebirth that comes from that. And I think the whole collection, and in many ways how it's written, is that point of like ash. Like if we are at this point of relative like things seems beginning to untangle, they ask the question of like, we don't have to go to the ash. We don't have to go there. But having gone there with this collection, and maybe having people feel that, then there is renewal out of that ash. I think that for me is the central part of that trope.
Brilliant. Thank you.
We've got an audience question about your cover from Willem Groenewegen in Holland, who says, could you tell us something about the artwork on the cover of your book?
I can, 100%. And firstly, I can tell him that, like, as soon as I had this cover on the book, I knew I'd get more questions about the cover of the book than the poems. So that's the first thing. It was literally like, yeah, for me, it's like, when I found it, I knew the person. I just knew instinctively the person who I wanted to draw this. And when I went and spoke to her, and we were doing a check-in of like, what can we have for the front cover? What is it going to be? And then I looked through her Instagram feed, and I was just like, this one is this one. And then we had a conversation. It was like, yes, it's this one, and it just feels. Her name is Naomi McLeod, and she's an incredible artist. And for me, it's this piece around because the bird's hands or the bird's feet are not feet, they're actually human hands, and they're holding what is a Tibetan cutting knife, which is actually what is used to cut through the veils. And so for me, that was the representation of cutting through the veils of not seeing, of being held to the brunt face of climate change and ecological collapse, and this bird doing the work for me before you even got into the poems. And I'm just literally like, I walk around with it most days, not looking at the poems, but actually just looking at the cover, just seeing how amazing it is. So I'm so grateful for Naomi for that. Thank you. Hopefully that answers something of your question.
Well, I'm going to have to give Jenna an opportunity to comment on the orange which she chose for her cover.
Yes, I love my cover. Thank you so much. But yes, I think I've mentioned I was quite interested in the way we aestheticize food on social media. So all our kind of food photos on social media, and got very, very into minimalist constructions of food. But what I also like about this is that I think this orange is ambiguous. So when I first showed it to one of my colleagues, she was like, "That's a very suggestive cover, Jenna." And I said, "Yes, well, it's a book about intimacy in part." But another close friend of mine described the orange as fleshy lungs, which I also liked. So it's kind of bringing in the body. But I think the cover does everything I want it to do. Slightly ambiguous, slightly strange, hopefully intriguing.
And it's not ice cream.
And it's not ice cream.
Actually, I should throw this in. From my past life, I was PR officer for Lion's Made Ice Cream, and we used to do shoots of ice cream. And you know those big poster pictures they have of the ice cream, where the texture is amazing, sort of rippled, and the ice cream is melting down. But of course, those pictures are taken in studio lights, so we didn't use ice cream. We used a mixture of dream topping and polyfiller, which looks like ice cream under studio lights. So there's a.
I know the secret now.
Yes, not edible. We've also got a question from Annie Berry. Do you think
no relation?
No relation. Oh,
no, I'm joking. Yeah, she's my mum.
Oh, question from Dom's mother. Do you think as humans we need to go through our struggle and pain in order to write from a place of authentic truth?
I'll let
Dom,
Jenna answer this one.
do you want to go first? Or?
No, I think you should, because I think ironically this is in both our very clearly like core of both our collections. So I think I'd love to hear.
So I suppose my simple answer is yes, but the caveat with that is I think it's a bit like how the best comedy comes from pain. I think the poems I've written here are largely quite serious, but I like to bring a sense of play to everything I'm doing. And you know, I before we began the launch, we were having a bit of a chat, and I described myself as not a serious poet, just because I like to bring things like TV, reality TV, social media, all that kind of popular culture detritus into my writing. So I think yes, I think to be human is to live with struggle and pain, but perhaps we can find something fun and exciting and inventive from that. I think in terms of authentic truth, that's really interesting. I suppose in my work, I'm always thinking about kind of an emotional resonance, I suppose, trying to find a way for the reader to connect, even if they've never experienced the thing that I am describing. I suppose I'm playing with authenticity a bit in making every speaker a character. So I don't know if I'm giving you truth, but I'm giving you truth but slant, maybe.
Right. And Dom.
It's interesting because then just to not respond about my work, but then to just think about Tashani's and also your work, Jenna. As you said, the authenticity maybe is like playing with it, but also I feel the pulse of authenticity and the heart behind the poems, which is clearly very you. And also in terms of what Tashani was talking about around, and you mentioned there around struggle and pain for pain's sake. Okay, great. Like we can lay it on the page if we really want, but it doesn't always transmute, because actually, where's the transformation? Where's the moment where, like, you bring someone to the edge of something that can actually shift something? I think that's that levity and that metamorphosis. That's it, and that's kind of I think what our poems and actually Tishani all have in common.
Yes, I really liked what Tishani said about when she's kind of reading news stories, how it's about like bringing the outside in while she's writing rather than just the inside out. That really resonated with me. I think that was a really articulate way of putting it.
Absolutely. So yes, Mum, I agree.
Well, I'd like to thank Jenna and Dom and Dom's mum, and also Tishani, of course, for some amazing readings and some fascinating discussion this evening. I'd like to thank the audience for being here. I hope you'll scroll down and order the poet's books at the end. And also, to finish on, while we were pre-recording the discussion between Tishani and Dom, while I was doing the setting up, unknown to me, they were having a very interesting conversation of their own. So we're going to finish with a short bit of extra conversation between Tishani and Dom. But thank you all very much for watching tonight. And I'll hand you over now, back in time to a week ago, to Tishani and Dom, talking about each other's books.
Thank you so much for this book, Tashani.
Oh, and likewise. I mean,
I was literally
I've been spending...
I was just reading through it like over the last like week or so, and just feeling this like, wow, like just my body just like pulsing and reacting to like the poems, and feeling this like this deep, like I think in many ways, while we write very differently, the rawness and the beauty and the directness, while also maintaining that tenderness, and how we're like, I just so thank you so much. It was magical.
Oh, and likewise, I've sort of been spending time with your poems and feeling so many levels of so many areas of paralleling and particularly the body. And I think for me, what was really interesting is that I'm not used to reading male writers write so generally and so from within the body in the same way, you know. So it was very interesting to me because I feel that it's an interesting echo. And I think we tend to somehow expect that because of ecofeminism and, you know, that whole idea of the woman and the earth, and those ideas are so entrenched in so many cultures. And I feel that it's so important to have also a male response, the male, you know, which is as deep and which is in fact singing together, you know, and how the body positions itself. So it's been really wonderful to read the poem.
Thank you so much.
All those things, yeah.
I find it fascinating that you picked up on that, actually, because like I know you've got some background in Tantra, is that right? I was reading. Yeah. So I think this, like in my work as well, like I see how as I've deepened into the poems, like the core feminine piece of me has responded in many ways to what's coming through the earth, regardless of the body that I'm in, and regardless of the soul of these poems feels that tenderness as well. So yeah, it was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. It's really interesting to read them side by side, because that also, I think another thing that I saw was this connection between micro and macro and individual and collective, and how it's about finding place, and to find place you have to find your body. And so I saw that, you know, in a few of your poems there's also this sense of fragmentation, of wanting to catch up with the body being ahead, and I have that in my poems too, of this longing that your body and you are friends, and how you long for wholeness, and that is healing. But what we're feeling is, for the most part, a lot of bombardment and fragmentation, and so this kind of tussle, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how do we come back, like in these moments of where the outside world is in free fall? Actually, what it's asking us is to come back to the body and to know it. Like, I think this is also the tension I found in your work and in my work between like divinity, the body, the earth, like what's happening, all these, and ultimately that isn't that belonging, that home, which is like recognizing that is what is needed beyond anything. So yeah, thank you. It was
absolutely.